Now I'm unmuted. Welcome back, everybody, for joining us for another Facebook Live. I'm Amanda Fries, a state government and capital reporter for the Times-Union. And I'm going to encourage all of you who are tuning in on the various social media platforms to ask questions directly through the platforms you're using. And to start things off, I'm just going to kind of highlight what was discussed during Governor Cuomo's briefing this afternoon. It just wrapped up about a half hour ago. And in that, he really emphasized and highlighted COVID-19 cases specifically are disproportionately affecting those in low income and minority communities. They've partnered with Northwell Healthcare to do testing of individuals in those particular communities downstate in New York City, which has been hardest hit by the pandemic. And they've seen and have numbers that show that there is disparity there with rates of infection nearly double in some instances to the citywide infection rate, up to, I believe it's 25-30%. We also, he noted that religious organizations can start congregating in groups of no more than 10 people, observing all of social distancing. He also encouraged religious entities to possibly consider doing an outdoor type setting for any type of ceremonies, as well as congregations, possibly doing it in parking lots with folks still in their cars. So that's a slow reopening, but I know that there's plenty of folks who have, especially in more religious periods of time. We've passed a couple of significant holidays. Folks are always looking to connect with their faith. And so that's slowly becoming more of a possibility as we move forward and begin reopening the economy. Obviously, today, the capital region has been cleared for beginning to reopen businesses, starting with construction, as well as curbside, retail, and food service. Obviously, for food service and restaurants, that's kind of already been going on. They were deemed essential from the get. However, I personally know, because I've been frequenting a lot of small businesses and a lot of takeout places because I'm so lazy. And I'm also just exhausted after working in the daily grind of covering the coronavirus, that I have noticed that some businesses have opted to shut down during it, even though they were deemed essential and could have remained open because of the safety concerns for their staff. Now going forward, that ability is being expanded to retail stores. You can't browse, but you'll be able to do so through a curbside pickup, obviously online ordering, which also has seemed to expand a lot with various industries and businesses in the area. Still haven't gotten any questions, so please, I'm going to encourage you ask any questions. Obviously, my forte is when it comes to state government and how it's handling the coronavirus. I also have plenty of knowledge on the local and regional level, having previously covered the city of Albany and Albany County, on how they're responding to it. Of particular interest, obviously, earlier was the metrics involved in determining whether a region could begin reopening. So we got our first question, yay. How is the state handling getting workers back into the office? An excellent question that has not been discussed on the state level. At this point, I think it's something that perhaps, there are some state offices that have been deemed essential services, and government has been deemed essential overall, particularly local government, and many of the services that local government provides is deemed essential. However, there hasn't been an outlined plan for state workers across departments and agencies when it comes to return to the office. Speaking with various state employees, however, there has been dialogue of when there might be a slow return to the office. And that's going to have to determine, or what's going to have to be determined is whether these individuals and employees could potentially continue to work from home and they can do their job remotely, as well as social distancing measures, masks, hand sanitizer, frequent cleaning. Obviously, all of that has to come into play. And with state agencies being across the state, while it's mostly concentrated in the capital region, there are certainly departments that are on a state level that will be impacted based off of where they are at in the state and which region is potentially cleared for reopening. Obviously, a lot of the communities downstate haven't been cleared to reopen. Elsewhere, upstate in New York, there has been a slow reopening. Most are still in the first phase, so that also is something that it hasn't happened yet. Although it's a fair question to ask, and I'm just speaking from the perspective of the folks that I've spoken to about this and some of the intel that I have received when it comes to the dialogue happening in various agencies. And the reality is, I think when it comes to state employees who were asked to work from home or were deemed non-essential in some capacity, it's still going to be a little while before they return to the office in any form. And perhaps there is going to be a rethinking of whether they need to return to the office. Perhaps it's something that they could just do remotely going forward. We haven't gotten any other questions, so I'll remind folks to check out timesunion.com for the latest when it comes to everything coronavirus related, as well as happenings in the capital region in general. We have some fantastic reporters who are out there getting those stories despite everything that is going on these days. Next question, will there be state layoffs? Many of you probably read Brendan Lyons' story that I believe ran Sunday or Monday of this week, talking about how the state has not talked about any layoffs or furloughs. And that still is not something that the governor is willing to entertain. Whether that is going to be a possibility going forward remains to be seen. However, basic math would suggest that something's got to give. Cuomo has been very passionate and constantly is pushing for the federal aid to help with state government that's seeing a deficit, over the next couple of years of over 60 billion, excuse me. So at this point, I think that a lot of state departments are waiting on what will happen on the federal level to see what funding the state might receive in order to keep these departments and obviously the jobs intact. However, there just really hasn't been any conversation about that. And it's because it's a tough conversation. Obviously, nobody wants to talk about the loss of jobs. We've already seen that on the local government level. And that's because they too do not know whether they'll get any federal aid. So they're in a holding pattern. How about a retirement incentive for employees? A great recommendation. That was something that was proposed prior to Governor Cuomo taking office. And the previous governor then had offered a beneficial retirement incentive that encouraged folks to retire early, which essentially saved jobs. And those jobs that were left empty once a person retired certainly weren't filled and then were eventually removed from the budget. There hasn't been anything proposed on any level. There really hasn't even been conversation on from the state union level. Obviously, we have PEF as well as the CSEA are very large unions for state workers, and it's been very quiet. However, something is going to have to give, and it's going to have to give sooner rather than later. But I do believe everyone is sort of waiting to see what the federal government does when it comes to providing state and local government aid. All right. So, talking about businesses that are opening in phase one. And I did mention this a little bit earlier. Obviously, one of them is allowing for construction and commercial work to resume because it's seen that they can more easily socially distance, as well as go about their daily business in a way that is protective and cognizant of the public health concern. As well as retail is allowed to do curbside pickup, which is a little unique in that regard. When it comes to future phases, we'll have to kind of wait and see where the capital region lands. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep those metrics the same and stable and not see any spikes that might set us back a little bit. And I believe I want to say it's in the second or third phase that we begin to see outdoor recreation open up. Obviously, there have been some outdoor recreation opportunities that have been granted by the state, and folks are allowed to do so, including golf. Also of note is the fact that beaches will be open. At least state beaches will be open for Memorial Day weekend, starting this Friday. And that was a decision made in conjunction with various other states in the area that were looking to open their beaches. And of course, the governor wanted to, work in tandem, and was concerned that perhaps if New York didn't open their beaches, that New Yorkers would then flock to beaches in surrounding states. Why would you lay off state workers just to have them go on unemployment? I can't really describe why a government would or wouldn't do something. That's kind of a difficult question to answer, because I'm not the individual or in a position where I am making those decisions. However, when it comes to unemployment, there is already a set amount of money that is available to those who then must file for unemployment. However, there's a lot of different ideas that you could toss out there when it comes to state workers. Right now, the state is hiring contact tracers. However, I'm curious, well, why not use some of those state workers who are essentially getting paid but may not be doing much in the way of their normal job? Why not put them in the role of contact tracers? So there's no definitive plan for layoffs at this point, but unfortunately, because every government has a budget and a certain amount of money that they're receiving, which in this case has been greatly diminished, the funds just aren't there. Now, if you were to put someone on unemployment, the funds are there for unemployment. I hope that answers the question at least a little bit. But when it comes to talking to why a government and why government leaders would do one thing or another, that's really up to them. Above my pay grade, I like to say. So while I continue on this journey and conversation with the folks who are tuning in, I'd like to encourage you to check out timesunion.com for the latest when it comes to everything going on with the coronavirus in the capital region, as well as across the state. And also just what's happening in your community. We have an amazing group of reporters out there who are covering local municipal government and what is happening in your community beyond the coronavirus. And that great work can be found at timesunion.com. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I've noticed recently, and I'd like to start off by talking about Cuomo's briefing, where there was a dovetailed discussion into nursing homes. Obviously, that's been a hot topic across the state, as we've seen spikes in deaths and cases of COVID in nursing homes. And today, Cuomo asked a reporter if that reporter believed a nursing home would take a patient they could not treat. Now, I don't know if he was asking this in jest, but there's quite a bit of evidence out there, and we've written plenty of stories over the years about private as well as public nursing homes and the conditions within. And one of the most typical stories that comes out of coverage of a nursing home or adult care facility is the inadequate staffing. And that's always been an issue. Well, it's at least been an issue for quite some time. As long as I have been a reporter, which is about 10 years, and covered municipal government, the nursing homes have always struggled when it comes to maintaining staffing, part of it being because they don't pay individuals enough. And so it's not a very lucrative position to take on. And also, from that, inadequate staffing levels often lead to potential allegations of inadequate care. And we've seen that across the board. Certainly, there have been lawsuits filed due to these instances. And so, what I'm getting to here is that at the end of the day, there are issues that nursing homes face already, and they rely on state and federal funding based off of their population and their residents who are at the nursing homes to maintain a budget. So it is in their interest to have residents, whether they're able to provide adequate and above board care or not, in order to maintain their budget and stay afloat. All right, so I'm going to encourage you again to submit your questions via Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. I don't know where else this might possibly be on, but whatever social media platform you may be tuning in, please feel free to submit questions. It seems like there's been a lot of questions about employees, and we just got another question in. Thank you. How much money is the state estimated to lose from the pandemic? Are we looking at a giant gap? Absolutely. So I believe just this year it's between I think it's around 13 billion. However, when it comes to the long term, which this is going to be there's going to be a long-term impact to this. The state is estimating about 61 billion over a 5-year period. So we're all in trouble. What does contact tracing look like in the capital region, and why do we need tracers to reopen? Well, the reason we need tracers is in order to follow any spread that might occur from someone who does test positive for the coronavirus. The whole key is trying to keep the spread low, the infection rate low. So when it comes to why we need them, that's really the reality. And right now, the infection rate is low, but the anticipation is as we reopen, that infection rate could increase, the spread and number of positive cases could increase. I say could, many people say will increase. That's the expectation. And having those contact tracers on hand is just in preparation of them potentially being needed, because we see that increase. When it comes to the capital region, I'm still, and what contact tracing looks like in the capital region, I'm still looking into that. Obviously, we have multiple counties within the capital region, 8 counties in total, and they all are allocating resources, specifically contact tracers. For example, Albany County appears to be using all existing county employees that might not have been doing work for an essential service, and they're being moved to potentially do contact tracing. In Schenectady County, they've allocated some of their existing county employees to do the contact tracing, but also have hired several individuals as well. The state is also looking to train and hire contact tracers. However, the question remains as to whether, where will those contact tracers be deployed? Since counties are being expected to have the adequate number of contact tracers, which is, I believe, 30 per 100,000 residents. So the one thing I certainly have a curiosity on and have not gotten clear answers is what are the requirements or skills that are necessary in order to be a contact tracer. I don't know what that looks like, but certainly there is training from Johns Hopkins. The state is working with the Johns Hopkins University when it comes to training for contact tracers, and that's just one of the 7 criteria that regions need to meet: number of contact tracers in order to begin a phased reopening. But as some capital region leaders have pointed out, they really only come into play when and if cases and then the infection rate spikes, because then you're going to need additional people to follow where the spread could have gone with these individuals who have tested positive. Is there a sense of how contact tracing is going in other states? Is it happening in other states? Is New York following any leads on that? Unfortunately, I haven't really heard anything on the state level when it comes to contact tracing. I do happen to have questions out to the governor's office on exactly how they're going about the hiring and training of contact tracers in the state. So hopefully we'll have answers to those questions in the near future. And certainly, folks, stay tuned. I am working on a story about contact tracing, particularly on the state level, what that looks like, whether they're following other models, but often New York has touted itself as the leader in all of this, and at least in part, the contact tracing, they're kind of following recommendations from Johns Hopkins. As for our state lawmakers, you might have read earlier this week that the state legislature is planning to return to session somewhat by doing it remotely and virtually early next week. And they are planning to tackle specific bills that would address COVID-19 issues, including housing, which I've been paying close attention to. Obviously, there have been calls, and there still are calls, for rent and mortgage payments to be canceled altogether. However, there are two bills that are on the docket proposed by state legislators. One that would cancel rent for a 90-day period, which was proposed back in early March, which whatever final bill comes out is going to need to be refined and adjusted. And there's also another bill that would essentially, how do I describe it? Essentially would be like a housing voucher. Folks who can't pay their rent would be able to apply for this housing voucher and receive funding that would help fill the gap from what portion of rent they can't cover. Now, both of these plans rely on the federal government passing legislation and providing funding that assists low-income renters and homeowners. And there is funding in the Senate bill, the HEROES Act, so-called HEROES Act, that includes that type of funding. However, it hasn't been finalized. So we're still waiting to see what the final package will look like. However, when it comes to state lawmakers, it seems like Common Cause, which had issued a statement yesterday suggesting that lawmakers should cut their pay in half because they haven't been in session, that certainly ignited some fire and a lot of folks who pointed out that state legislators have been working. They've been working in their respective districts, in their communities, in order to answer questions. And I can confirm there are plenty of folks who have called state legislators when it comes to issues with getting their unemployment payments, as well as working with small businesses and small business organizations in preparing for a reopening. But that seemed to have kind of jump-started a plan for the state legislature to return to session. At least the Senate intends to return to session next Tuesday and Wednesday. So I imagine we'll see some type of movement. However, when it comes to them getting things done, it's not on a state level because everything is being taken care of by executive order and the governor's executive power. However, that doesn't mean that state legislators aren't trying to do what they can for the constituents in their respective districts and communities. All right, so I'm gonna toss this out there one more time. See if there are any other additional questions for the current people watching this. On your social media, whatever social media platform you're using, feel free to ask questions through there, and I will attempt to answer them. And also always encourage you to go to timesunion.com for the latest when it comes to news in the Capital Region and in your individual communities, as well as what's going on with the coronavirus pandemic in our region. Any other questions? That's right, I just sang. This is basically how I live my life. Everything is a little bit of a song. Gotta have a little ditty. All right, hold on. I wouldn't want to be a state legislator right now. Lots of stress. Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks in positions right now who are dealing with a lot of stress in various different ways. You have nurses, doctors, who are, on the front lines and seeing what the coronavirus can do to an individual. You have local leaders who are working with the community as well as local businesses in order to figure out a safe plan for reopening. And that includes state legislators. Obviously, it's easy to kind of pinpoint where stress is more in a position than in another, but I think everybody is dealing with some type of stress, whether it's they're unemployed and they're trying to get unemployment payments, or they're working from home, but they're feeling isolated and maybe disconnected from their fellow employees and coworkers. I certainly deal with my own stresses, not to minimize anybody else's stress. However, I would say that I think everybody is under an element of stress in some way. And, the only way to get through this is to get through this together. Remember that we're here for one another. And certainly the Times Union is here for you to provide the latest and up-to-date information on the coronavirus, as well as what's happening in your communities and how we're all dealing with this pandemic in a time where certainly now at least we have all of the social media and virtual elements to be able to still connect with folks. All right, I want to do one last call out when it comes to questions, and then scroll down here to make sure I haven't missed any. Reading. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me today. Please check timesunion.com for the latest. I'm sure there is plenty of things that were just posted while I was talking that I'm not even aware of and couldn't even answer your question on. But if you go to timesunion.com, you might be able to get your question answered that way. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and have a great day. Hope you all get to enjoy this beautiful weather we're having.